Imagine being a Chinese imperial concubine who lived in the Forbidden City, surrounded by silken servants educated in poetry and music, protected by thousands of palace guards, and then watching Mongol horsemen breach the gates of Kaifeng. Realizing with absolute horror that your status as imperial property makes you the highest value prize, that within days you will be stripped of your robes, branded like livestock, forced to march barefoot across the Gobi Desert to Karakoram, where you will be given to a Mongol general as a war trophy, forbidden from speaking Chinese, forbidden from practicing your religion, forced to bear children who will be raised as Mongols and taught to despise everything you once were. You were told the imperial family would protect you. You were never told about the systematic cultural erasure programs. You were never told that Mongol Khans kept detailed registries of captured concubines organized by beauty and skills. You were never told that your new husband already owned 17 other Chinese concubines, and that you would be ranked among them based on compliance. You were never told that resistance meant being sold to a brothel on the Silk Road, where you would serve as traders until you died. In a few minutes, you will understand what happened in the Jur camps outside Karakoram, where Chinese concubines were regicated. In a few minutes, you will understand why Mongol census records list captured concubines alongside horses and cattle. In a few minutes, you will understand why Chinese historians use the phrase 10,000 Li of Tears to describe the journey from imperial palaces to Mongol ownership. This is not a legend. This was imperial policy. This happened during the fall of the Jin dynasty in 1234, the Southern Song in 1279, and continued for a century of Mongol rule over China. The secret history of the Mongols, written around 1240, described the distribution of captured women with bureaucratic precision. Noble women of the conquered were divided among officers according to rank. The most beautiful were sent to the Great Khan. Rashid al-Din, the Persian historian with access to Mongol court records, wrote in 1304, Chinese concubines were prized above all others for their refinement and education. They were transformed into Mongol wives, their pasts erased, their children raised to serve the empire, and the Yuan Shi, the official history of Mongol rule in China compiled in 1370, contains census data listing redistributed palace women as a category of imperial property transferred during conquest. What Mongol administrators recorded as efficient resource management, we are about to recognize as systematic identity destruction. What their chroniclers celebrated as cultural integration, we will see as forced assimilation designed to humiliate the conquered through the bodies of their most protected women. Before we go deeper into Lady May's story, if you want more histories buried in administrative records and census documents, subscribe now and hit the bell, because once you hear what happened to 23-year-old Lady May when Kaifeng fell to Mongol forces in 1232, you will never see the Mongol conquests as simple military campaigns again. And when you reach the moment that disturbs you most, and you will tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what shocked you the most. The year was 1232. Winter gripped northern China, and Lady May, a third-rank concubine in the Jin imperial palace, stood in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, listening to sounds she had never heard before, Mongol war drums, the screams of palace guards being slaughtered, the crash of gates that were supposed to be impregnable. Within hours, everything that defined her existence would be catalogued, redistributed, and erased. Lady May had entered the palace at 15, selected from thousands of candidates for her beauty and her skill in calligraphy. She could write poetry in classical styles. She played bagukin. She understood court etiquette with the precision required to navigate imperial hierarchies without giving offense. For 8 years, she had lived in gilded chambers, attended by servants, occasionally summoned to the emperor's presence. Her life was constrained, but predictable, comfortable within its boundaries. That comfort died the moment Mongol cavalry entered the palace grounds. The Mongols did not pillage randomly. They executed a system perfected through decades of conquest. Soldiers secured strategic locations, first armories, treasuries, granaries. Then they moved to the palace complex with specific orders: capture the imperial family and all palace women alive. Dead concubines had no value. Living ones could be redistributed, used to reward officers, integrated into Mongol households to demonstrate total victory. Lady May was found hiding with 47 other concubines in the inner court. Mongol soldiers herded them into the main courtyard, where a Mongol official accompanied by a Chinese translator who had defected years earlier conducted an inventory. Each woman was examined, her rank verified against palace records the Mongols had seized. Names were recorded in Mongolian script. Ages estimated. Physical attributes noted. Beauty ranked on a scale the translator explained had been standardized across all conquered territories. Lady May was classified as first-grade beauty, educated, suitable for officer assignment. The words meant nothing to her. Not yet, but the translator's eyes held pity that made her stomach twist. She would understand soon enough. The journey to Mongolia began 3 days later. The captured women, over 300, from various palace ranks, were organized into groups of 50, each group assigned to a Mongol officer responsible for delivering them to Karakoram. They marched on foot. No carriages, no litters. The Mongols provided minimal food and water enough to survive, but not enough to maintain strength for resistance. The route covered roughly 1,500 miles across territories devastated by war. Villages burned, fields empty, bodies left unburied. During the march, the systematic destruction of identity began. The women were forbidden from speaking Chinese among themselves. Mongol guards enforced this through punishment beatings for first offenses, withholding food for repeated violations. They were taught basic Mongolian commands: walk, stop, eat, sleep, silence. The linguistic isolation was deliberate. Language is memory. Without language, the past becomes inaccessible even to those who lived it. Their clothing was replaced. The elaborate silk robes that marked imperial status were stripped away and burned in fires visible to the entire column. They were given rough wool deals Mongol garments, designed for steppe life and felt boots. The transformation was visual and psychological. Without their clothing, they looked like Mongol women. Mirrors were forbidden. They could not see themselves, could not recognize the people they were becoming. Lady May tried to resist. She whispered poetry to herself in Chinese, holding on to the rhythms and phrases that defined her education. But after 2 weeks of speaking only Mongolian commands, the Chinese words felt foreign in her mouth. After a month, she struggled to remember entire poems. After 2 months, she could recall only fragments. The language was leaving her, and with it, the self she had built over 23 years. They reached Karakoram after 4 months of travel. 63 women had died during the journey. Disease, exhaustion, despair manifesting as refusal to eat. Their bodies were left beside the road without ceremony. The survivors were taken to a compound outside the city, where captured women from across the empire were processed before distribution. The compound held perhaps 800 women, Chinese concubines like Lady May, Korean noblewomen, Persian ladies from captured households, Rus princesses from cities that no longer existed. All undergoing the same process: linguistic erasure, cultural re-education, preparation for assignment to Mongol households. Lady May was assigned to a mid-ranking Mongol general named Batu. She was his 19th wife. The Mongols practiced unlimited polygamy, with captured noblewomen forming a separate tier beneath Mongol-born wives, but above common slave women. Her role was explicitly defined by a matriarch who spoke functional Chinese, bare sons who would be warriors, daughters who would be married into other Mongol families, and demonstrate through compliance that Chinese civilization had been absorbed into Mongol superiority. The household operated with brutal efficiency. Mongol-born wives held authority. Chinese concubines obeyed or faced sale to brothels. Lady May learned Mongol customs through observation and punishment. She learned to prepare fermented mare's milk and to dismantle gers. She learned to ride horses, something imperial concubines never did. She learned to sleep on felt mats on the ground instead of carved beds. and she learned to submit to Batu with the passivity expected of concubines who understood their status. These encounters were not about desire, they were about dominance. Batu owned her the way he owned his horses. He used her body when convenient and ignored her existence otherwise. But the psychological violation went deeper than physical assault. Because Batu had a Mongol-born wife named Borte, who supervised the concubines with specific instructions, they must forget China. They must become Mongol. Any sign of resistance would be punished through the children they bore. Lady May became pregnant in her 3rd month with Batu. When her son was born, he was taken immediately and given to Borte to raise. Lady May was permitted to nurse him for 6 months. Then he was removed to the men's schools, where he would be trained as a Mongol warrior. She was forbidden from teaching him Chinese, forbidden from singing him Chinese lullabies, forbidden from naming him anything but the Mongol name Borte had chosen, Tubilai. She bore 3 more children over the next 6 years. 2 sons and a daughter. All were removed and raised as Mongols. She watched them grow without knowing her. They spoke only Mongolian. They worshipped Mongol gods. They learned to shoot bows and ride at full gallop. Her daughter was married to another Mongol general's son at age 13. None of her children ever called her mother. They called her by her Mongol name, Hotani, meaning Golden One, and treated her with the polite distance reserved for low-status concubines. But the cruelest element was not the physical separation, it was the forced participation in erasing her own heritage. Batu occasionally hosted Chinese merchants traveling the Silk Road. When they visited, Lady May was required to serve them while wearing Mongol clothing, speaking Mongolian, demonstrating through her presence that Chinese women could be transformed into Mongol property. The merchants stared, sometimes recognizing palace tattoos on her wrists that marked her former status. But they said nothing. What could they say? She was Mongol property now. Commenting would insult her owner. One merchant, braver or more foolish than others, whispered to her in Chinese, "Do you remember the palace?" She froze. The question detonated memories she had buried: guards with plum blossoms, the scent of sandalwood incense, poetry recitations in halls that echoed with educated voices. She opened her mouth to respond, and realized with horror that she could not form coherent Chinese sentences anymore. 15 years in Mongolia had eroded the language until only fragments remained. She whispered back, "Palace. Gone. Altani now. Altani now." The merchant's face showed something between pity and revulsion. He left the next morning without further conversation. And Lady May understood what she had become, a ghost haunting her own body. The person she had been was dead. The person she was now existed only in relation to Mongol systems that had consumed her. Rashid al-Din recorded the outcomes of these cultural erasure programs with satisfaction. Within a single generation, Chinese concubines bore Mongol children who knew nothing of Chinese ways. This was the genius of the empire, not merely defeating enemies but absorbing them so completely that resistance became unthinkable. The system succeeded because it targeted identity at every level. Language, clothing, religion, family all systematically replaced, and it succeeded because the women themselves became complicit in erasing their pasts. Survival required cooperation. Cooperation required forgetting. Forgetting became permanent. Lady May lived until 1265. She was 56 years old, ancient by the standards of the steppe. She had borne 7 children, none of whom acknowledged her as more than a concubine. She had lived as Altani 3 times longer than she had lived as Lady May, and when she died, she was buried in a common grave outside Karakoram without markers, without ceremony, her name recorded only in Mongol census documents as Altani, Chinese concubine, 7th property of General Batu, deceased. But fragments survived, because in 2003, archaeologists excavating Mongol-era graves near Karakoram discovered a burial containing anomalous artifacts, a Chinese poem carved into a piece of bone. The characters were crude, scratched by someone who had almost forgotten how to write. The poem was incomplete, only 4 lines. Plum blossoms in snow. Palace halls echo silence, I have forgotten my name. But the moon remembers. DNA analysis confirmed the remains were of a woman with Han Chinese ancestry who had lived during the mid-13th century. Isotope analysis showed she had been born in northern China and died in Mongolia. She had lived at least 30 years in captivity based on bone markers indicating steppe diet and lifestyle. The archaeologists called her Subject K47. They had no way to know her name was Lady May, or that she had been a third-rank concubine who could once recite hundreds of poems from memory, or that she had spent her final years scratching fragments of identity into bones because she had forgotten how to write on silk. But the poems survived, crude and incomplete, but undeniably there, a small act of resistance in a system designed to erase everything. She had forgotten her name, but she had not forgotten that she had once had one, and she had carved that remembrance into bone where it would outlast empires. The practice was systematic across Mongol conquests. Chinese, Korean, Persian, Rus noblewomen all underwent the same process. Captured, catalogued, redistributed, erased. The Mongol administrative genius was not just military, but cultural. They understood that controlling territory required controlling memory. And memory lived in language, in customs, in the transmission of identity from mother to child. By severing that transmission, by transforming captured women into Mongol mothers raising Mongol children, the empire dissolved resistance before it could form. The conquered people's own children became the instruments of their erasure. Lady May's story is not over. There are more bone fragments with scratched poems, more census records listing redistributed palace women, more archaeological evidence of women buried far from their homelands with artifacts suggesting dual identities, Mongol in life, Chinese in secret remembrance. If this moved you, tell me in the comments. If you want more stories they buried in administrative efficiency and imperial records, subscribe, because their silence ends here. Because Lady May carved a poem into bone. Because even after forgetting her name, she remembered that she had once been someone worth remembering. And no empire's bureaucracy can erase that completely.